Piaget is not only renowned for its watches but also for its jewellery, both characterized by an outgoing, vibrant style. Just think of the designs of the Piaget Polo, the Imperator, the Andy Warhol, Altiplano and Limelight watches. Besides their unique shapes, these watches are powered by in-house developed and manufactured movements. And that is exactly a facet of Piaget that does not get enough attention today. However, back in the early 1900s, Piaget was celebrated for its movements, and for a long period of time it had a reputable name as a movement manufacturer. When you dig into the rich history of the brand, you will find numerous iconic movements that were beautifully made, well finished, and among the very best mechanical movements you could find. Today we're here in Côte-aux-Fées. It's a small village in the Swiss Jura mountains where Georges Edouard Piaget set up his workshop in 1874. Piaget made a name for himself by manufacturing movements and movement parts, even before he started making his own watches. And since then, Piaget has remained one of the few brands to design and manufacture movements in-house. Among the countless calibres created by Piaget, several legendary ultra-thin movements immediately come to mind. But Piaget also manufactured all types of complications and even quartz movements. It would be hard to list every movement manufactured by Piaget, so we're going to take a look at some of the brand's milestones, including a few that are less well known, but really worth a mention. As you can imagine, Piaget's deeply rooted tradition and rich expertise in ultra-thin movements did not come out of the blue. This already started from the early 20th century. But first, a few words on ultra-thin. What many people do not realize is that ultra-thin could easily be called a complication, because ultra-thin movements are much more complicated to design, manufacture and assemble than any normal movement that is not ultra-thin. To design and manufacture an ultra-thin movement that is robust, reliable and precise in timekeeping is really extremely difficult. The best known historical ultra-thin Piaget movements are from the 1950s. Of course, we start with the legendary caliber 9P. That was presented by Valentin Piaget in 1957, and for a long time this was probably the slimmest mechanical movement with a thickness of just 2 mm. And mind you, this was in an era without 5-axis CNC machines or computer-aided design. In 1960, Piaget introduced the caliber 12P that featured a micro-rotor, and this automatic movement measured only 2.3 mm and was, for quite some years, the thinnest automatic movement. The 1950s and the 1960s were a prolific period of creativity for the brand, which was marked by the production of many movements. Take for example the 2P, a miniature rectangle movement, or the 4P and the 6P with the respective diameters of 4 and 6 lines that corresponds to 9 mm and 13.5 mm. And then there are the legendary 20P and 25P calibers. Record thin, yet very delicate movements made with Jean Lassalle in the mid-1970s. The Piaget caliber 20P was based on the Jean Lassalle caliber 1200 with a staggering 1.2 mm thickness, while the 25P, its automatic version, was only 2.08 mm thick. Piaget created movements that were way thinner than any movement before, and to achieve this thinness, several innovative concepts, such as an entirely new architecture and the use of ball bearings, were integrated. Many of these ideas are the basis of modern record-thin movements. In the meantime, the popularity of the new, accurate quartz watches plunged the Swiss mechanical watch industry into a deep crisis. Quartz was a technological breakthrough, allowing to make watches that were cheaper, more accurate and slimmer than ever before. Interestingly, Piaget has several milestones in the field of quartz. As a pioneer of this new technology, Piaget formed part of a consortium of Swiss brands that created the first prototype quartz wristwatch in 1966 with its Beta 21 movement. Around that movement, Piaget created cushion-shaped case, this one, but there are other interesting and original developments in the field, such as the ultra-thin quartz caliber 7P. in 1976 that powered the first polo watches. And even in the early 1990s, Piaget presented the caliber 212P, which is an original high-end quartz movement featuring a chronograph and a perpetual calendar. More recently, there were the 570P and the 700P. Exotic, hybrid, mostly mechanical movement whose production remained quite limited. These had no battery and were wound by a rotor, but regulated by a quartz oscillator. With the renaissance of mechanical watchmaking in the 1980s and the 1990s, Piaget pursued its tradition of designing and manufacturing mechanical movements. Again, many new calibers were presented, including some of the most sophisticated movements featuring tourbillons and minute repeaters. Here again, ultra-thin deserves a special mention. The successor of that very first ultra-thin hand-wound caliber 9P is caliber 430P that measures 2.1 mm. And this was the first modern movement to perpetuate the Piaget tradition of crafting thin and elegant dress watches. There were the ultra-thin caliber 1200P with a micro rotor and a 1270P with a micro rotor and a tourbillon. Then in 2014, Piaget presented the 900P and later its automatic version with a peripheral rotor, the 910P. These two calibers mark an important step forward. With their ingenious construction fusing the main plate and the caseback, they allowed Piaget to present 3.65 mm thin Altiplano watches. But the jewel in the crown of Piaget's ultra-thin movement is undoubtedly the Altiplano Ultimate Concept. At just 2 mm, it was the thinnest mechanical watch ever when it was unveiled in 2018. This amazing movement was inspired by the 900P and the radical engineering of the architecture of that movement. Its groundbreaking thinness was achieved by fusing the movement's main plate, the case and the bezel into one single component. Normally a watch would comprise a mid-case, a detachable caseback, crystal in the front held down by the bezel. Inside would be the movement, with a main plate and bridges and gears on axis pivoting between the main plate and those bridges. What Piaget created was nothing short of genius. The caseback and the main plate are now fused into one. The gears, rotating on axis, now pivot on ball bearings on the main plate. The same goes for the balance, which is cantilevered and pivots directly on the caseback on ball bearings. It would be hard to list all the details that made this achievement possible, but it was groundbreaking and it is the inspiration for a new generation of ultra-thin movements. If you want to dig deeper into the Altiplano Ultimate Concept and its clever construction, you can have a look on our video on this groundbreaking watch or check the in-depth stories on the Monochrome website. One of the amazing things about Piaget, which many people do not realize today, is that the brand started as a movement manufacturer and only later started to make its own watches. Movement manufacturing and the art of ultra-thin are a long tradition at Piaget. Over the years, Piaget produced movements for other brands like Omega, Cartier, Van Cleef, IWC and Ralph Lauren. But most importantly, it was the brand's expertise in miniaturization that allowed Piaget to produce an inimitable combination of ultra-thin watches in expressive designs and colors. And in this period of fierce competition in the field of ultra-thin, we look forward to seeing what the brand might present next.